All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your patience. We are having some technical difficulties. Ralph is not at his home today. He is traveling, so he has been experiencing some connection issues. We are trying to get him back up and running as soon as possible. So until we can get that going, then please be patient with us and we will let you know. All right, thank you. All right, good evening. Thanks again for your patience. I'm going to be starting the show solo tonight. First, I want to thank our sponsors, the Kathleen and Eddie Arthur Hearts of Love Fund. This is a community fund that was started in 2019. They have been doing some really big things for the Alexandria community, and I am really excited to share what they have next. I can't say much more about it right now, but there will be a story on it. So thanks to them. I will put a link for donating in the comment section. All right, so tonight we will be talking with author Kathryn Goodwin Tone. She's the author of The King's Broad Arrow, and it will be a night full of fiction and fantasy and adventure. And we're actually going to learn what the King's Broad Arrow is. That might also be a trivia question. So if you already know it, good for you. Be the first to answer correctly, and you will get a free signed copy of Kathryn's book. So until we get Ralph back on, I am going to speak with Kathryn just about her background and about her life as an author. Hi, Kathryn. How are you?
Hi, Grace. I'm great. Glad to be here tonight.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. I know it's technical difficulties, but we're rolling with it. It is a virtual world, so I am glad we can be here together. All right, so I want to start off with just a little bit about who you are, where you're from, how'd you grow up? Has writing always been a part of your life? If not, how'd you get into it?
So I grew up in Northern Virginia in Annandale, not far from where I'm living now. I went to Penn State and studied journalism. But after I graduated, I moved to Germany and I worked for the U.S. Army. I lived in Bavaria, right at the base of the Alps between Germany and Austria. So writing wasn't really a part of my life until I decided to try to write a book, which was in 2013. This book.
And so when you say you decided to try to write a book, like where did that decision come from?
Well, the inspiration for this book came from when my own kids, I have two kids who are young adults now, 23, 25. When they were in elementary school, I taught a class at their school as an elective about introducing kids to philosophy. And we would cover a different theme every week: courage, friendship, citizenship, responsibility. I saw how the kids, these are mostly sixth graders, so 11, 12-year-olds. I saw their reaction to just talking about these topics, and my goal was to help them kind of figure out, what these things meant to them, and almost their own set of guidelines, I guess, for, at that age, you're kind of trying to figure out what kind of person you want to be. And then my family, we moved back to Germany, so I wasn't teaching that elective anymore, and I just wanted to continue exploring it, and so I decided to try and write a book. So the themes of The King's Broad Arrow are primarily courage and responsibility, and it's set during the first 2 years of the American Revolution. I felt like a war setting was a great place for those to think about those topics, and I just have always been interested in the American Revolution, and so it kind of sprang from that.
I love that. So I want to throw out the first trivia question really quick since we have mentioned the name of your book, The King's Broad Arrow. So the first question is, what is the King's Broad Arrow? If any of you in the audience know, you can use Google. That's fine. We encourage it. Just be the first to type in the correct answer in the comment section, and we will announce your winner, and we will send you a free signed copy of Kathryn's book. All right, so The King's Broad Arrow. You mentioned you love Revolutionary War and history. So why fiction? Why not go with a more traditional, like a biography of someone from this time period? Why fiction fantasy?
I chose historical fiction because I wanted to convey some kind of life lessons to young readers. I've worked with kids all my life, and to have a fictional character and put him through this sort of adventure where he's tested and challenged seemed to me the best way, rather than the like more rigid structure of straight up biography or straight up history book. Most of the characters in the book are real. The main character isn't, and that just gives you, as a writer, a lot of flexibility to, make the story go where you want. But it's, it could have happened. I definitely stand by the history of the story, the chronology, and I did tons of research.
Great. All right, so we just got Ralph back on. I'm going to
Okay.
add him to the stream, and then you guys can continue this conversation.
Thanks, Grace.
Right.
How are you?
Glad to have you back, Ralph.
Yay.
All right.
Gosh, that was weird.
Take it away.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm having trouble hearing you guys. I don't know why. But anyway, so that was pretty good. But I can't hear you. So something
You can't hear me?
going amiss.
All right, I can come back on, Ralph.
Why don't you continue to tell us how you chose this subject and why you wrote it in this format as a fiction? Mm-hmm. And what I'm really curious, and I think the audience would be curious about too, is you took a teenager, it might even be a pre-teenager, I can't remember exactly, and he became a central point, and he changed, his life changed, and he became willing to fight a deadly fight for something that he at first didn't understand why the fight was even going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, to me, this time period is so interesting because I think, I'm not sure what your experience was as, students in American schools. I feel like the whole revolutionary period is mythologized a bit. It's presented as almost a spontaneous, unanimous event, and it absolutely wasn't. It was a civil war. People were not convinced, and so I wanted to show to that audience that how tenuous this time period was, and how a few events really pivoted it to. We're pivoting points to getting more people on board with that just incredibly audacious concept of forming a new country. I wanted them to understand how, in the context of human civilization, how what we did to form a country based on a set of principles was so extraordinary, and just show, it was just touch and go. And so I just had to make up a story where one person was going through all of this, and then having him be a young man who's trying to figure everything out on a personal level was a way to also illuminate those themes of like courage. How, are you born with courage? Do you learn courage? Are some people more courageous than others? I want kids to recognize that you don't always feel courageous when you're doing something that is, brave. And I think kids are courageous every single day and they don't realize it. So that's why I chose that age of that character. Is that your question?
Yeah, I think early on in the book there were two characters central to his development and his growth in becoming courageous, because I don't think he was courageous at the outset, and that was it was Gerard on the ship and
Mm-hmm.
Eamon. I think that was his best
Amen.
friend, right? And so talk about those two those two characters and how they influenced him, particularly Eamon at the start, because he looked up to Eamon from what I remember,
Mm-hmm.
and then Gerard on the ship, and how that helped him transport to get this courage. Because I don't know if you're born with that much courage, but as he grew up and was thrown in the middle of this war to establish a new country,
Mm-hmm.
he went through some life-altering changes. So let's hear about that and what you were thinking.
So Eamon, even though Eamon's only a small part, he only has a small part in the story in the beginning. He's always with Sam. He's with him through the whole story, and Sam's always kind of comparing himself to Eamon. And I think it takes all that he went through to recognize that he's more like Eamon than he realized. He kind of always felt like he was in his shadow because Eamon's such a different personality. And so that is a way to show kids that you don't have to be a big, bold personality to have courage. And we also talk about physical courage versus moral courage, and they're very different. But we all have different. I mean, there's different examples of how that manifests itself. In the first draft of the book, actually, Eamon dies, and I just couldn't do it. Like I liked him too much, so I had to rewrite the whole thing, the whole ending. And so moving on to Gerard, because this book came from wanting to introduce kids to philosophy, Gerard's kind of the philosopher figure, and he came from he's fictional, but he came from a fantastic book that I discovered about. It's called Literary Underground of the Old Regime, and it's about an underground book selling network pre-French Revolution. So he represents, he presents an opportunity to flush out these ideas that Sam is trying to work through. And he impresses upon Sam the value of knowledge and power, and shows how, again, trying to trace that experience, that within human history, the printing press, was a huge advancement for sharing knowledge and information. So that's kind of his role, is to be a sounding board for Sam working out these things.
Yeah, he was pretty influential in particularly when he was on that the slave ship or the prisoner ship early in the book. And it was from that point you begin to see the maturation of Sam.
Right. Sam learns so much from Gerard, and he comes off the ship, very different. I mean, it's only a few months, but he's changed so much. And the other thing that Gerard provides is there's a bit of mystery to him, so that's a mystery that the next book will resolve. The ring and the.
So here's this youngster, 12 or 13 or 14 years old, and he's now been captured by the Brits. He fears the Brits, and he's thrust into the middle of the war, or the war effort, and he starts to meet all these historical figures along the way. It was a great twist. So talk about his relationship with them and how they began to affect him.
Mm-hmm. So the first the first kind of really famous figure that he meets is Paul Revere, and um, when he meets him, he's wounded from escaping the ship, and Paul Revere really is sort of a father figure to him. Sam's trying so desperately to get home, but he's not home yet, and Paul Revere and the time with their family is like a safe space for him to recover and get his strength back. Um, I came to admire Paul Revere so much in writing this and doing the research. And I think that him taking in Sam was absolutely what Paul Revere would have done. He was really a caring and compassionate person. And anyone that wants to learn more about him, I think the best book I read was Paul Revere and the World He Lived In by Esther Forbes, who also wrote Johnny Tremaine. Yeah, but he is really, he's a great character. So the second, and there's so much more to Paul Revere than just, the Midnight Ride. The second character who really influenced Sam is Thomas Payne. I think he's one of the most underrated of our founding fathers. His contribution is really tremendous with Common Sense and American Crisis. So he was really the most powerful literary figure of the Revolution, and including him in the story is a way to articulate sort of the arguments that were going on in the colonies. As I said before, it wasn't a unanimous thing, and people were really on the fence for the first almost 2 years. Common Sense was such a pivotal moment to show people the way forward. So those conversations that Thomas Payne and Sam have are kind of mirroring the conversations that people were having throughout the colonies. And he's just a great character. Someone absolutely should make a movie about him. He didn't. It didn't end well. He burned a lot of bridges, but still an interesting guy. And he survived the French Revolution as well. So, yeah. And then the third character that really, Washington has a huge impact, but it's not as personal with Sam as the next character is Hamilton. When I was writing the book, my husband was reading Ron Chernow's biography of Hamilton, and he was obsessed, and he's like, "You've got to put him in the story." And I thought, okay, well, we'll see. And then, of course, when the musical came out, I thought, I'm no dummy. I'm going to jump on the Hamilton train. So, but he works perfectly in the story, and he too is such an interesting character. And so he kind of serves, I think, as like a big brother figure to Sam. But so yeah, they all just help him get through that journey of figuring out what he should be doing, what he wants, what's most important. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't imagine, and we have a lot of 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds that went off to war, maybe even 16 and 17-year-olds, at World War II, Vietnam and the like, and they were in the shadows. I'm sure have come across some of the great generals of our time, MacArthur, Patton, and the like, Eisenhower. And I can't imagine what it would feel like for a youngster who's 13, not 18 or not 19, in the presence of such now renowned historical figures like Washington, Hamilton. How would he feel? What would he even think of somebody like Washington?
I'm sorry. Can you? I couldn't hear.
Yeah, what would he have felt like when he met somebody like a Washington or a Hamilton or a Payne? What is the feelings that you would want to come across through Sam to the readers?
So when Sam meets George Washington, it's honestly, I think, maybe my favorite part of the story, and it's it's a vehicle to show also one of the most important life lessons that I wanted to impart, and it's that he sees Washington as fearless, and the same way he saw Eamon, fearless, never doubting themselves, never hesitating, and that's not true. And what I want kids to understand from reading this book is fear is a part of life. It's part of the human experience. You never are going to outgrow fear, but what you learn is how to cope with fear. So his meeting with Washington and that one-on-one talk they have where Washington, he basically says to Washington, well, are you afraid when you go into battle? And Washington says, honestly, my hardest battles are when I'm alone and, confronted with things and just trying to figure out the way forward. So showing to a young man that everyone has these struggles, everyone has to figure out, their strengths and how to best confront those fears is really powerful. So that was hopefully realistic on how he dealt with meeting Washington, and it that was part of the reason that he felt like he had more courage than he realized, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, he was growing in courage. We have a winner for the first question, so
all right,
let's bring Grace on, and
that's great.
Yes. So the answer was, and Kathryn can explain this in a little more detail, and she can give us a fun fact about Alexandria in relation to it. But the King's Broad Arrow is basically a symbol indicating property of the British Navy, and the winner was Michelle D'Amato.
All right.
Great. Fabulous.
That's exactly right.
I'm going to give the audience the second question while we're at it to give them time to come up with the answer. So the second question is, what month and year is thought of as the turning point in the Revolutionary War? So what month and year is credited as the turning point in the Revolutionary War? Again, it's a little tougher question. You have to think on it a little.
That's probably really debatable. I mean,
it might be, but when they give the answer, we'll discuss it a little bit.
Okay.
And there's a lot of rationale for what it exactly is. So one of the scenes in the book that struck me, in thinking back to, if I was a teenager put into that circumstance, would I be brave, or would I be like head under the seat of the ship? Was the crossing of the Delaware in December of
1776.
So, and it's going to be a pretty harrowing scene. So, what were your thoughts there in that tense situation?
So that's such an important moment because they were absolutely at their lowest ebb, and it really could have just ended there. That moment is such a testament to Washington's just the combination of his characteristics, that he was willing to just take a chance. He recognized this is sort of it. If we can do this, it's tremendous payoff, but if not, it's over. I tried more to focus on the physical aspects of what they did. I mean, they really battled every form of weather possible in a 18-hour time period, and just the immense toll that it took on them. I think you didn't really have a choice in that moment to be brave or not. Like, if you stopped, you would freeze to death. You really had to stick with they all had to stick together as an army. I think you just had to suppress your fear and just go for it. I mean, they didn't know where they were going, and so maybe they were so focused on just battling the elements that they didn't have that much time to think about it. But it was hard to write, and the battle of Trenton, it's hard. There's so much going on. I just tried to focus on what just Sam was seeing and feeling and smelling and hearing. So just the intensity of it all.
Yeah, that was tough times. 1776, and I mean, even up where you are right now, I read a historical book about the battles that were taking place up there, and a lot of the
in Quebec and
the colonial cannons was sinking in the mud, and they couldn't even figure out how to deal with that. And so, they really had their backs to the wall the entire time. And it's just amazing that we got through it and got our country off the ground and going. Let me ask a different question on perspective. And if you look at the Revolutionary War, I think the battlefields of the Revolutionary Army or the Colonial Army was filled with a broad mix of elder people and young people. And if you look at the battles that we fought since then, Vietnam and Korea, it was a lot more 18, 19-year-olds and some older people, not many past 26, I would say. And how would you describe the courage of the teens back in the colonial era compared to the teens of the wars, the big two, World War I, World War II, and the teens of the 2022, right? Are they the same? Is it different? Do we see less maturity? If you compared those 3 years, how would you back them up?
Well, obviously, teenagers in colonial times had so much more responsibility. Just running their farms or their shops, or they were entrusted with a lot at a young age. It wasn't uncommon for if the fathers went away, for the sons to kind of take over the business, or and the life skills that they needed were life and death, literally. I don't think a lot of teens now have life and death skill sets. It's different what they have to navigate. They're navigating, cars and gas and technology. Yeah. And in terms of soldiers in the following wars, they were fighting for an established country, whereas the colonial soldiers had no idea how it was going to turn out. That's a good question, but I don't know if I can answer it completely. It's pretty easy to compare, the lifestyles between the two times, but in terms of maturity, just neurologically, you mature the way you mature. Young men are young men then and now, not always their best years in terms of maturity, but
I guess they mature in different ways.
Right. I think they could see the consequences of irresponsibility. They could be life and death consequences. You leave the fire too long, or you let the fire go out, you're going to freeze to death. You don't catch, you don't save food for the winter, you're going to starve to death. I don't think teenagers now are thinking about those kind of things.
No, I think you're right. It just shows, how humanity itself has changed over 200 years. Don't worry about, the things we worry about are a lot different than what was thought about back then. Right back then, I think in the colonial period too, the enemy was right in front of them. Right. Today's enemies are different. They're it's more philosophical. It's more, it's on the other side of the world, or it's right in front of us. It's more
Mm-hmm.
political. Um, um, so it completely different fights, I think, than what we saw, or
That's
what we didn't see, but what may have been experienced back in
mm-hmm.
1770s.
Yes.
But so, what in looking back on the book, it's been out for a couple of years. It's a terrific read.
Thank you.
It's for adults who want to read it, for teenagers who want to read it. Just a fabulous, well written. It keeps your interest. Um, but what are the takeaways that you want the readers to have from this book?
So I think what I want people to take away a few things from the book. No matter what the time frame is or what the challenges are, we're realizing that what you, even if you don't see it in the exact moment, your choices have consequences, and following your instincts about what the right thing to do is, and living up to the principles that you've you've decided on for yourself, can have a huge impact. Sometimes it takes a while to see how it all evolves, but it absolutely does. And the importance of figuring out what is you value and not, that's the most important part of being a human being. I think it's not necessarily what you're going to do with your life in terms of a profession, but what kind of person are you going to be, and just trying to stay true to that no matter what the challenge is, and life is always going to challenge you. Another important part of this book is I think, showing that the importance of education and knowledge, because that is what guides us also in our choices. And now we have, access to more information than ever, but we have to use it wisely. And yeah, and fighting for what you believe. I mean, fighting for what you believe now, what kind of person you want to be, what kind of country do we want to be. It takes a different form. I mean, we're not literally fighting for, hopefully not fighting for what we want, but more now, it's more through, they didn't have the electoral process like we do now. Now we should do it through elections. And
Yeah.
but yeah, so using that knowledge and power that's available to you to make good decisions. And
Yeah. And it's also understanding what you're fighting for. I
Mhm.
think Sam probably at the beginning didn't he didn't really want to fight, and he didn't know why he even wanted to enter the fight, but he learned. And so sometimes you have to have your eyes and ears open, and you may come up with a different conclusion that is better.
Yeah,
You don't
and
know.
he didn't think he could make a difference, but he absolutely did.
You absolutely did. And we
Mhm.
have a winner for the second question.
All right. Well, again, it's subjective, I think, but
Well,
Well, if anyone was paying close attention, they would have heard you guys say it. And the answer for tonight is December 1776. And Michelle D'Amato got that one again.
yeah, I think it is debatable because it's whether you're doing it from a battle perspective or
so you're talking about the crossing of the Delaware?
well, you had the crossing of Delaware, the
Yeah.
Battle of Trenton, and a couple of other battles in December that were kind of make or break, right?
Yeah.
If any
Well,
of those things
the
didn't
second
fall,
Battle of Trenton was equally as important. The one that took place 2 days later. I mean, they were absolutely up against the wall, and Cornwallis was attacking. And when they snuck around the secret trail to Princeton, they could have been wiped out really easily then as
and it
well.
was still December.
Mhm.
So, but if you look at it, militaristic turning points, people would probably point later, but there's so much happened in that month where they could have thrown in the towel
Right.
with one bad step, and it didn't happen. And
And it really got the whole world's attention, that this army that nobody thought could do anything defeated the Hessians and then the British. Small battles, but still. But having been to the Saratoga battlefield yesterday, I think they would argue that Saratoga was up there.
Yeah, from a battle and military perspective, I can't disagree.
But psychologically, yeah,
but
Trenton
psychological,
huge.
So what's next? I know. Talk about your follow-up book, because
I'm the book
that I'm working. We're taking Sam.
Well, I am going to write a sequel to The King's Broad Arrow, but my next book is also historical fiction, but it's going to be a biography of Adrian Lafayette, the wife of the Marquis de Lafayette. Her story is incredible. She lived kind of in the shadow of her famous husband, but she was just as brave and principled, and she kept their family together all those years that he was away during the American Revolution, and then in the French Revolution, she was imprisoned. Lafayette was imprisoned for 5 years. Her mother, grandmother, and sister were all guillotined on the same day.
Wow.
She was just incredible portrait of courage. And I think that you could argue that if she had not supported Lafayette as unconditionally as she did during the American Revolution, his role could have been different. And hence, if we hadn't gotten aid from the French, we wouldn't have won the war. I mean, it would have turned out, who knows how it would have turned out. So she just, I think, is fascinating. So that is the next book that I'm writing, but I am going to write a sequel to The King's Broad Arrow. The King's Broad Arrow will be part of a trilogy.
Good. It was a fun read. Anyway, so well, thanks for coming on and sharing your time with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's can't wait to get the follow up. Well, the Lafayette book first, and then the follow up to King's Broad Arrow. I think they'll be wonderful, and it's been wonderful having you. And good luck with your next book. And
thank you.
Visit all the good things you can see in upstate New York. It's a great place to go.
Thanks. Yeah, I am really enjoying it.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
All right. Great show. Thanks, everyone, for hanging in through the beginning. We got Ralph back. So, Ralph, I think that was a really great interview. And I am now excited to read the book and even more excited for the sequel. I read fast. So tell us who we will be seeing in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, we have Lana Clark, Love Times Infinity. It's a coming-of-age story of a young girl. And it's a well-written portrait of someone's life and the changes they go through and the trials and tribulations. So we look forward to having her on in 2 weeks. And then I know we're going to have a very packed September and October, and we're quickly closing in on the end of the year already. It's amazing.
I know. It's wild. I love the path we're following with your books. We went from children's book and now a teen book, and now we're doing a coming of age story. So I like the arc that we're making. I'm excited to see you again in 2 weeks.
Yes, at the back end as we get into September and October, that starts to be World Series time. And you want to guess on the themes of the book?
Baseball, probably.
Baseball. There we go. So
very apt.
Everybody on their toes. Yes. And we're also going to do something very interesting in October. We're going to have a fiction writer forum with 3 of our previous guests to discuss the different genres and how they, within fiction writing, and how each of those have developed their characters and their stories. It should be interesting.
Fascinating. A lot of fun stuff coming up. I'm excited for it. So until we get there, Ralph, be the good news in someone's life.